Okay. Once again, very good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. We will start our session today. I am going to do a very short introduction to our series and introduce our speakers today. My name is Claudia Cadet. I'm the marketing director here at Ex Libris EMEA. And we've really started this webinar series with a very kind of fine intent of sharing with our audience really every Thursday for the last couple of weeks. We've asked our industry experts to help us kind of look at, new pioneering approaches that have really helped us redefine how libraries are operating, how they're offering services. We have been tweeting and we have been sharing some content online. So if you do want to have the opportunity to be able to go back and see the recordings of the previous sessions, you are more than welcome to either get in touch with us or go online, have a look at our Twitter account, or even you may have already received it in your inbox. We've already had 4 sessions so far. And today we are going to be joined by Asaf and Joel, who are really going to look at the community response to these challenging times. We know that what we're really trying to do here is to sort of discover how a culture of cooperation and innovation have in fact defied the sort of predictions of a demise of what we thought that the libraries would be, to actually becoming real centers of digital practice. We're going to be learning with them, kind of the new ways of how to provide digital content, the systems that are needed to kind of access it, to share it, allowing you to become real facilitators of information literacy and digital skills. Our series is going to carry on. So next week we will be joined by Sharona, who will share her expertise around resource sharing, a very interesting topic which really shows the power of sharing. And being part of an international resource sharing community. And then the final session, we will be joined by Nadav, who is going to show us how the library can be a coordinator of all the research products and helping really the research office maximize their impact. So today I'm going to be very brief and introduce you to Asaf and Joel. Asaf Klein is the VP of Product Management, and Joel Kartiki is the Senior Librarian at Ex Libris. They are going to be sharing their insights to what they've seen that has been the community response to these sort of very challenging times during the COVID pandemic. So without any further ado, Daniela, lovely host, I'm going to ask you to hand over to Yoel. Noel, you should have presentation rights soon to be able to share.
Yes, I do, and I'm sharing. Okay. So, everybody, good afternoon. I assume you hear me okay. And let's begin. Asaf, take it away.
Yep. Okay. So, again, thank you for joining us today. We're going to go through quite a few things. We're going to look at some of the trends that we see in higher education, also through literature. And then you all will walk you through some of the things that we're hearing and that we're seeing happening in the libraries, and sort of take a stab at looking how things may change in the future based on what we're seeing now and some of the trends that we'll be reviewing with you. Can you go on to the next one? No. All right, so you may, some of you may have seen these articles. There are others that we'll look at briefly, and they really talk about the changes that are going on in higher education and libraries specifically. These are all trends that we have seen taking place over the last years. That, for instance, the move or the de-emphasis of print collection, the move to online services, and being integrated in other aspects of the academic processes like teaching and learning and research. But what we'll see is that these trends are accelerating because of the period that we are going through. Can you continue? And really to summarize things in two pictures in one sentence, it's really a move from being more on campus, in presence in the library, to really doing as much as possible online. It's remote work, remote access, remote teaching, online services as much as possible. Now, there are still needs to provide on-premise services, but the trend, which we have seen in the past, for doing more things online, digital services, is really accelerating. Next slide, please. And these changes often creates opportunities, and we've seen this. We've seen libraries looking at their processes, looking at their services, and thinking about what they can do differently, and experimenting, seeing what works, what doesn't work, what can be improved, what isn't needed anymore. It could be something like introducing, chat, because you can't just walk up to the desk and ask a question. It could be as simple as that. It could be putting an emphasis more on document delivery. So there's really a lot of experimenting going on in order to see what is the best way to provide the services for the library users, their stakeholders, students, researchers, etc. And some of the trends that are mentioned in those articles that we've seen, again, have existed in the past, but we really see an acceleration of them. So digitization, not just mass digitization, but digitization on demand. The librarians being embedded in other processes, like in teaching and learning and in research, really being involved. Obviously, especially today, is really being a very deep understanding of what it is you're doing and what you're spending money on in order to be the most effective with the money that you have. So these are all trends that we're seeing, and we'll talk about many of them in the next slides in minutes. And really just some quotes and from different articles that we're seeing. This is really about moving as much as possible to being virtual, to being online. The next one is also focused on the virtual services. It could be through mail, or again, as we see here, through a virtual chat bot, really trying to provide innovative services, experimenting with new services in order to reach out to the users as best as possible, making sure everyone, of course, stays safe. And it's very clear that those that can and have sort of moved into the digital space are able to really provide the richer and better services for their staff and for their stakeholders. Next. And here we see from community college in California, really talking about how they could shift, they could be agile and cope with the changing situation, which is and continues to be fluid, in order to provide as much as possible really uninterrupted access to services and resources. Next. And it's really been an amazing thing to see about how libraries have rose up to this challenge and haven't really stopped working and experimenting and creating new types of services and ways to provide the resources needed by their community, by their users, and we'll see some of this as we go forward in the webinar. Okay, Yoel?
Okay, thank you, Asaf. So I'm just going to pop right back to the beginning for one moment. We can see what are we going to do from here. We're going to see what do we hear from libraries. What do we see going on with libraries from their point of view? What do we hear? And then what do we see happening in the libraries on a data level, not just theoretically, what do we think is happening because of the effects of COVID-19, but what do we actually see happening looking at the data? What does the community need? What have they turned to us for? And what do we think is going to happen? So that's what we're going to talk about from here on. So what do we hear from the libraries? So this is not from a formal study of some sort where we made a survey and had people answer it and made sure we got a certain example which represents everybody. This is stuff we've heard from Salesforce cases which have come in, from implementation team who has needed to adapt to new workflows, the professional services team who was involved on the ground in the libraries with the staff and needing to adapt to a new reality. So this is how we've heard what's happening, and this is what we see, what we hear. So first of all, almost all staff, it started to change recently, past few weeks, but not too much. Almost all staff working from home, limited staff in the library. Throughout the whole period, there has almost always been limited staff in the library, limited staff in general in the institution, including in the library. Home delivery has become big. In the case of Alma, we can look at the entire academic library world, but if we focus on Alma, we've always had a home delivery function, but now it's become much more prevalent. Sometimes for a fee, but even if not for a fee, it's become more prevalent. Anytime there's been a request for a physical item, the institution has checked to see if they can acquire electronically. That's something also which has always existed for the past 10, 15 years, that an institution may prefer electronic over physical, but again, now it's become much more prevalent. A lot of electronic resources from many vendors have become free, at least for a temporary trial period, and the institutions have come and made those available. They've made them available by activating them, and they've also added them to their repository so that they would be discoverable to the end user. And in many cases, there's been a halt, a cease and desist on processing physical items, either because nobody's in the institution to do it, because the staff is at home, or because there's simply no need because there's no patrons coming in to loan them, or because, as we're going to see soon, they've even told the vendors to stop sending. So if we put all this together, what does it mean? There's a prevalence of electronic usage over physical. The free electronic resources are being made discoverable, so that means people are going to get used to it as well. They're preferring to acquire electronic access to something rather than give it physical, even if they can give it physical and it's home delivery or curbside delivery, or somebody makes an appointment to come pick it up. In any case, they're preferring more so than in the past to provide electronic access and the ceasing of the physical items, which is a big one, as we're going to see. And these are a few things that we've heard, that there's boxes of unopened books piling up, that they've told the vendors to stop the shipment of print materials. Staff just aren't in the institution to process these items. There's been a whole other area of what kind of work can someone do remotely. And processing physical items and putting on the barcodes and putting in the RFID chip and putting it on the cart to roll it to the open stacks and put it on the shelf is certainly something that cannot be done from home, at least not the part of putting it on the shelf. Returns have been an issue. Regarding returns, for example, we've got a quarantine system where we have a method of making another location, which is quarantine, or having a reshelving period where it's put into the discovery and into the repository search that the item states that it's in a certain period before going back onto the shelf. So these are all things that have come up now that we're hearing from the staff in the institutions and our own Ex Libris staff who are dealing with the people in the library. Now, switching from home, this is just an interesting caveat here that, the last bullet, in the case of Alma, it's been very easy to transition to working from home because it's a SaaS environment. There's nothing to install on the PC. There's no special Windows needed. If they're not using their own PC, they can just use any PC they have at home. Now, we've heard from institutions who are doing all kinds of work, not only the library software. And in some cases, they needed to install things, which means before they would get a laptop from the institution, they needed something installed. Or if they were using another computer at home, they would need to install something. Alma SaaS environment, no need to do that. From any computer, you can use it. Okay, so this is what we hear from them. Now, what do we see? Because we can always say what we think is happening. But if we really want to make evidence-based decisions and evidence-based predictions, which you'll see we eventually get to at the end of this presentation, we want to really look at the data. So this is I'm going to look at 3 year-over-year reports. Year-over-year being a comparison of the past 12 months with the past 13 to 24 months. So we're now July, so we're looking at July of 2018 to June of 2020. And the red line is the last 13 to 24 months. So the red line, we're looking at the number of physical item loans from July 2018, which would start right here in the middle. It goes up to October, comes down in December. You can see the blue line is the same. The blue line is within the past 12 to 1 month ago. So the past 2 years from July to December have been the same, and that's very typical. July and December are typically lower. October is typically higher, except for the case of Australia. It's going to be summer break, winter break, middle of the first semester in October, so it goes up. However, when we look here, the red on the bottom, April, May, June of 2020, the red square on the bottom right, which is the blue line here where it says 2020, for April, we see a major drop because obviously the patrons were not coming into the institution, very few loans. Those loans were either a curbside pickup, maybe it was a renewal, which was considered a loan for various reasons we won't get into. And then gradually, May, June, you see it kind of going up. We'll see what the trend is going to be, but it's not even close. When we look at the 2019, when we look at the previous 13 to 24 months, it's not even close. The drop here between March and April is just drastic, and it hasn't recovered even close. So that's the physical item loans. Physical item requests, same thing. If they can't loan it, they're not going to be requesting it. Again, it's coming up May, June, but it's not really there yet. Although it's coming up closer than the physical item loans were. We compare, for example, June 2019, we had 503 physical item loans, whereas June we have 485 physical item loans. So it's getting closer, although even with that, we would expect the current year to be higher because there's more institutions. Where you can see, for example, August, September, October, November, December, the blue is higher than the red. The previous 1 to 12 months is higher than the year before that because there are more institutions. And same thing with the mobile sessions. Mobile sessions are typically associated with physical items. There's a mobile app where the librarian goes to the shelf, scans in a barcode, it's sent in transit or it's sent to the on-hold shelf. And with the decrease in physical item requests, the decrease of work orders, staff in the institution who's able to do work orders on items, that has all gone down. So that's what we see happening based on the data. None of those changes were involving electronic usage. Electronic usage has not gone down, hasn't gone up super dramatically like one would expect. That's why I'm focusing here on the actual data, because one would say to himself, wow, the electronic probably skyrocketed. Electronics stayed. It went up, but not as drastically as the physical item usage went down. Okay. What does the community need these days? So we have been in touch with the community in various ways One of our chief forms of communication is our mailing lists, which are actually discussion lists. We've got for Alma, Leganto, Primo, all of the products on the higher education platform. And in addition, we created a page on our Knowledge Center dedicated to best practices for the community during COVID-19. And that page includes links to and schedulings for webinars. And we had a series of webinars. For example, here you see on 23 March and on 1st of April, 2nd of April, that's just a small example of many webinars, where institutions could ask questions in advance, and we would prepare documentation, prepare answers. And by the way, it's not just us as Ex Libris staff. The community in general, it was a real community atmosphere and co-op collaboration. And this, for example, is a page that links to documents as well as questions and answers relating specifically to subjects around the COVID-19. And this is just an example of one. I blocked out anyone's personal information here, where we're monitoring the list to see what's going on. So someone's asking a question here about suppressing the request button in Primo. Why do they want to suppress the request button in Primo? They don't want patrons to be requesting physical items because they can't come and loan them anyway, and they want to stop all the requests. So we have a document, how to temporarily remove the request link from Primo. And that's just one of many, many examples, maybe even hundreds, of questions and answers which went out during this period. And then we loaded all of those onto a page. This one is just specifically for Alma, a page which is dedicated to all of the questions and answers which came in during the COVID-19. Now, what's interesting here, if we look at all of these subjects, okay, they all have something in common, except for one of them. The first one, they're looking for making a way to have a patron have a scheduled time to come pick up his requested resource. Another one is to change the pickup locations for physical item requests. The third one is for configuring something about the physical item request. The fourth one is for returned items to remain in quarantine. They all deal with physical items. The main, I would even go so far as to say the exclusive part of the challenge around the COVID-19 has been around handling physical inventory. There's only one question answer on here that came in which doesn't deal with physical inventory, and that's the one that deals with making electronic resources free, activating the free electronic resources. Well, we said at the beginning, many vendors made their electronic resources freely available for a certain time, and we made a document and a process of how to do that in Alma, how to activate them in Alma. Everything else here is around physical items. All of the heavy work that the institutions have had to deal with have been around dealing with their physical inventory. Okay, so this is some examples of not just in Alma, but other solutions which have needed to be provided for academic institutions during this unique period. As you know, we did some projects with Rapid ILL. Alma Digital, we had a 5-week, once-a-week session on Alma Digital. Mobile, the mobile app, so all different kinds of things. And this is an example of one of the special use cases for the COVID-19 was when an item gets returned, it needs to go into quarantine. It can't go right on the shelf. So you can see here it says temporary library, temporary location, quarantine. It says due back, and it has a certain due back date. Every country in America, the states, every region had their own rules about how long does it need to stay in quarantine. So there was a configuration in the whole process of from the return date to when it can go back on the shelf, how many days or how many hours and days. So that's why there's a due back date. And this is just a comment from one of the institutions that they're keeping up with those lists. Those are two of the lists that I was talking about, and that it's been helpful. Okay, now based on everything that I've shown so far, what do we predict is going to happen? So let's ask ourselves, or if you're in an institution, you can ask. And this is, it's not going to be the same for every institution for sure, but let's ask ourselves theoretically, what would have happened if COVID-19 came along just like it did, and in the typical institution, which let's say has 75% of their inventory based on something physical and 25% on electronic. I'm talking about the actual inventory, not the amount of expenditures going towards that type of inventory, how much they actually have. If that physical had been a minor part, 20%, and 80% had been electronic, would things have continued as normal? Probably. Certainly more as normal as now. There wouldn't have been a need to quarantine so much, to remove the request options, to do the curbside pickup, the home delivery. There would have been less staff in the first place dealing with those physical items, less physical items coming in, less boxes of books piling up unopened. So things probably would have continued more as normal because there was no disruption. That's something else I didn't point out, but there was no disruption at all to anything electronic because the electronic resources librarian who deals with the proxy and all other aspects of the access and the activation and the loading bibliographic records and the suppressing and the publishing and everything else continues just as normal. There's nothing physical that needs to be in the institution for that to happen. So, the assumption I already said, if there had been more of the electronic present in an institution, then probably things would have continued more as normal. And we actually know that that's the case because there are a few institutions in the world that are either exclusively or major predominantly electronic. So as a result of that, what do we think is going to happen now in the future? Now, if we step back for one moment from the world of the academic library, as difficult as it is, we step out of the world of the academic library. The whole world in general right now is talking about what kind of effects the COVID-19 is going to have on the world. For example, real estate. In real estate, they say these companies who have been renting very high rent offices in the middle of downtowns all around the world for a lot of money, and seeing that their workers have been working at home for 3-4 months and everything's going just fine, are probably going to reevaluate that need. And the doctor's clinics who are used to having patients come in and park and come in and swipe a card and get a ticket and sit in the waiting room and cough on other people, etc., and who are now doing a lot of their doctor-patient appointments via telephone, might, after the COVID-19, say, hey, you know, if we can have half of all of our meetings via telephone because I don't really have to see the patient, maybe we'll continue that. So same thing in the world of the academic library, where things have been forced upon us as a change, like those doctor's appointments in the real estate downtown for the expensive property. Things have been forced upon us, but we see that some of those things might actually be good to continue after the situation. Habit, as the last bullet says, habits caused by necessity during the COVID-19 period will cause staff to reevaluate previous work procedures and in that sense continue the higher prevalence and preference for electronic over physical. They'll say to themselves, hey, what's going on here? We got through things pretty well. You know, maybe they'll have a staff get together and evaluate what happened, and the staff dealing with the electronic really was very little affected, whereas the staff dealing with the physical had a lot to do. So this more or less is what I just said now. Maybe it's okay to continue not processing all those physical items. Maybe we don't need to go tell the vendors, yeah, keep sending us 10 boxes a day. And in any case, there's been a trend we'll see very soon. There's been a trend of electronic increasing over physical, but years ago it was a high change, and then it kind of flattened out over the past couple of years. But there's a suspicion now that it's going to again drastically change. And if we look at some of these articles, some of them are just out. This one's June 25th. Some academics from Library Journal, some academic institutions, for example, are planning abbreviated in-person semesters while others are developing hybrid online in-person instruction. Others plan to stay fully remote. So if an institution is planning first semester 2020 to be remote, how many physical items is it recommended that they're going to be purchasing when students aren't going to be coming in? The end user is not physically going to be coming into the institution to loan them anyway. Or there'll be a much smaller percentage than there were in the past because they're going to be learning remotely and they're not going to be on campus. And that's just the actual article. Here's another one. Harvard announced, this is just from also very recently, July 6th, 10 days ago. In Forbes, Harvard announced today that it would invite no more than 40% of its undergraduates to live on campus this fall. So even if every student was coming to the library, it's still going to be 60% less than last year who can loan them, never mind if they prefer electronic over physical anyway. But there's going to be less end users there in the first place to do the physical item loaning anyway. Then we've got May 4th, also from Library Journal. I'm sure we'll have some students who choose to do a remote first semester, and that's fine. This is from the Dean of Purdue University, one of our Alma development partners, by the way, some 8-9 years ago. We have programs that all could be remote for those students. I'm sure we'll have students who want to come back and have some sort of residential experience. What those numbers or percentages will look like remains to be seen. So there's some places know they're going to be closed. Some will have a certain percentage back on campuses. Some don't even know at this stage. So when it comes time to buying inventory, collection management, and choosing, am I going to get that in a physical item? Am I going to get that only in electronic? Or even if I can't get it in electronic, do I want to get it in physical? Who's going to be using it in the first semester? So based on that, based on what we just saw, this is what we know has been happening. This is what we predict will happen. Let's take a look. So this is known based on real data. This is no real surprise. What we're looking at here is physical versus electronic format based on expenditure, not based on how much inventory of that format type the institution has, but how much are they spending towards it. And we can see that from 2001 to 2015, the orange line, which is the electronic format, was increasing at a regular high pace. And the physical, correspondingly, was going down at a high pace. Then you can see, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving on this, but the line going up and down, where it says the sharp increase and decrease plateaus. So around 2015, this is on an overall level, but it's somewhere around where it crosses over there. It's usually somewhere around 2008, 2014 in most institutions, or 2008 to 2012. Here it's 2011, when you look at it all together. Around 2015, that sharp increase, decrease ended, and it kind of plateaued out. It flattened. The big thing, oh, everything's going electronic, the paperless society, didn't happen. Things plateaued. Electronic remained higher than the physical, but they started getting even as far as going up and going down. They were plateauing. What do we expect is going to happen now? So now, this is where the prediction. So from 2020 to 2025, we expect again that drastic increase, drastic decrease is going to continue, is going to pick up again. Because now there's a real need for it. Like if we're talking about that first semester now, 2020, and we'd like to hear your feedback, in fact. We purposely did this quickly. We're leaving 20 minutes for discussion if we want. Those of you on the call here now who are involved in collection management, it would be interesting to hear, are you planning on purchasing physical inventory for things which will be needed first semester 2020? And if so, what are your considerations in doing that? Okay, so that covers what I've got to say here. Really, like I alluded to at the beginning, there was a lot of collaboration here. I think both sides, the customer community, the ex-libris community, learned really just as much about everything from each other. It was a back and forth situation.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add that the things that you all showed were, the questions and answers and the various solutions for the challenges about how to do various things. These were things that ex-libris facilitated, but the questions that were asked and the solutions, the various solutions that were proposed, were actually coming from the community. We just provided a platform for putting that information somewhere, and that's where you really see that community approach for understanding what the issues were and solving those challenges that the libraries were facing. So it was really, as I mentioned, we saw the libraries really stepping up, thinking about the services. They're experimenting, coming up with solutions, and it was really, in that sense, a privilege to be part of that and be able to help out as much as possible. And as you all mentioned, we do have time for questions and further discussion.
Thank you, Asaf. Thank you, Yoel. Thank you both. That was really interesting. Fascinating to see the adaptation, and I think the way that people quickly seem to adapt really in the face of adversity. I'm just going to open up the floor now, just to see if we have any questions. Anyone you can just use the chat to pop your question in the chat, and we will present those to our two hosts today. I do have one question coming through. So question is, how do you think COVID-19 will influence library collection management policies in the years to come?
Asaf, you want to take it? You want me to take it?
Sure, I'll start. So these are things that we've mentioned the trends, and we've been seeing this. Yoel showed some of the statistics as well, where many of the collection development policies, when possible, of course it depends on who's requesting the resource and other factors, but we see a shift in policies that will prefer electronic online version when possible. Okay. And this is something that will definitely influence and become more standard in many libraries. So we see this trend. It has existed before. There were some institutions that had that policy in place, others did not, but we see that trend accelerating.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm just having a look and see if we have any further questions from our audience. We don't have any more, so I'm going to thank you, Asaf. Thank you, Yoel, very much for a really engaging session today. I really appreciate it. I'm sure our audience as well. We have got obviously a follow-up email will go out with the recording of the session. And if there are any questions, we will most certainly forward them directly to you. I'm going to thank everybody and wish you all a fantastic Thursday and a fabulous weekend. Thank you.